The mediation room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and polished wood. Their attorney sat across from me, cufflinks catching the fluorescent light as he slid the lawsuit across the table like a winning hand. He spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from billing by the hour. "We're prepared to move forward," he said. I didn't touch the papers. Instead, I looked at him and asked, calm as I could manage, "Before you file that, have you checked the access deed?" There was a pause. Not long. Just enough. He gave a thin smile. "We've reviewed everything." I nodded once. Signed nothing. They thought they were suing me over my 2,500 acres. What they didn't realize, they were driving across it. I'm 58 years old, and every acre I own has a history longer than most of the people who now drive past it. My grandfather bought the first section after the war. My father added to it in the 70s when neighboring farms started folding. I spent the last 30 years expanding it carefully parcel by parcel until it reached 2,500 acres of pasture timber and creek bottom. Part of it I lease for cattle. A few hundred acres sit in conservation easement. The North Ridge is managed timber. I thin myself every few seasons. I keep every deed survey and plat map in fireproof cabinets. Some of those maps are older than the county's digital records. Paper doesn't forget. I live in the same ranch house I grew up in. Metal roof, wide porch. My truck is 15 years old and paid off. 5 years ago, the southern boundary changed. A developer bought the adjacent farmland and carved it into a gated subdivision, stone entrance, ornamental ponds, tidy rows of identical mailboxes. An HOA formed before the last curb dried. They sent me an invitation to join. I never responded. My land was here long before their gate. The first letter arrived certified mail on a Tuesday afternoon. I signed for it at the kitchen table, opened it with a pocket knife, and read it twice before setting it down. According to the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, my agricultural structures were in violation of their community aesthetic standards. They cited the height of my perimeter, fencing the visibility of my main barn from certain lots, and what they described as commercial livestock activity inconsistent with neighborhood character. I remember staring at that phrase for a while. My barn had been standing for 40 years. I assumed it was a clerical mistake. Developments overlap on paper sometimes. Survey lines get misread, so I drafted a polite response. Brief, professional. I explained that my property was not subject to their covenants and had never been annexed into their association. 2 weeks later, another certified letter arrived. This one referenced their master development plan and claimed portions of my acreage fell under shared use and compliance agreements tied to subdivision access. I didn't feel angry. I felt something else, because I knew that wasn't right, but now it wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was formal. The lawsuit arrived 3 months later, filed in county court. Clean, professional, confident. They were seeking enforcement of subdivision covenants against my property, removal of non-compliant fencing, monetary penalties for ongoing violations, and a declaratory judgment recognizing what they called shared access governance over the southern corridor of my land. Shared access governance. That phrase told me everything I needed to know about how they saw this. They assumed I would settle. Most people do when a formal complaint lands on their kitchen table with a case number stamped across the top. At one of their monthly HOA meetings, the board president, a real estate attorney with campaign photos on his website, described me as non-cooperative and obstructive to community standards. A resident recorded it. Someone sent me the clip. Meanwhile, homeowners started complaining about my cattle trailers using their road, about feed deliveries, about the sound of diesel engines before sunrise. There is only one paved road leading into that subdivision. It curves past my southern pasture, crosses a shallow drainage culvert, and continues through their stone gate. My father and grandfather built that road decades ago to reach the back acreage when it was nothing but soybean fields. The developer paved over what was already there. I hadn't thought much about it in years, until they decided it belonged to them. After the lawsuit was filed, the tone shifted. SUVs with HOA decals began idling near my fence line. A man with a clipboard walked the perimeter one afternoon photographing posts as if they were crime scenes. A week later, a temporary sign appeared near the subdivision entrance. Private Community Road. Off 4 shekels only. My feed supplier called to say someone had questioned his access. A grading contractor told me an HOA representative suggested large equipment might violate community traffic policies. They were testing boundaries, seeing if pressure would create compliance. I didn't argue. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I ordered a full title report on every parcel touching that southern boundary. I pulled the original county plat maps, the ones recorded before the subdivision existed. Then I opened the fireproof cabinet and reviewed archive deeds from the 70s, back when my father expanded the ranch. I met my attorney at his office with a banker's box of documents. He flipped through them slowly, page after page, then he stopped, read one paragraph again, looked up at me quieter than before. They built their entrance, he said, on your road. We laid the surveys side by side across his conference table. The paved road feeding the subdivision, the one with the stone columns and iron gate, sat entirely within a parcel, still deeded in my name. Every foot of asphalt traced back to a meets and bounds description recorded 42 years ago, when my father consolidated the southern tracts. There was a construction easement granted to the developer 5 years earlier. Temporary, limited. It allowed paving and utility tie-ins during build-out. It expired 18 months after completion. There was no recorded perpetual easement, no dedication to the county, no conveyance to the HOA, no public road designation, nothing. The developer had assumed the transfer would be negotiated later, once the homes were sold and momentum made it easier. It never was. We confirmed it with the county clerk, then again through the title company. Clean chain. No gaps. Legally speaking, every resident in that gated community drove across private property I owned. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I asked for certified copies. That evening, I opened a new binder, labeled it Access, Southern Corridor, and began organizing the documents in chronological order. Paper has weight when it's accurate. The easiest move would have been to close the road. Legally, I could have. A temporary gate. A notice posted at the entrance. It would have caused immediate panic. I didn't. Instead, I filed a formal counterclaim. We attached certified copies of the original deed, the expired construction easement, and the updated title report. I requested dismissal of their covenant enforcement and a declaratory judgment affirming sole ownership of the access corridor. Quietly, through counsel, we notified their insurance carrier of a potential access liability dispute involving non-deeded roadway use. Then I commissioned a traffic impact study, documenting volume commercial deliveries and long-term wear on the pavement my family had originally laid down as gravel decades ago. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Publicly, they maintained composure. Residents were told the matter was procedural. Privately, their attorney began to understand the exposure. If access were ever restricted, even temporarily, property values would stall. Mortgage lenders could freeze transactions. Title policies might trigger exclusions. A week later, 2 board members asked if we could talk informally. I shook my head. Let's handle it properly, I said, and waited. Mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a neutral office park, halfway between my ranch and their subdivision. They arrived in a group board, president-treasurer, their attorney. Polished shoes. Confident posture. Legal pads already filled with notes. Their opening position was simple. They would drop the fines and clarify misunderstandings if I granted the HOA formal recognition of a perpetual access easement under their governance structure. In other words, I would legitimize their authority. When it was my turn, I kept my voice even. I was willing to grant permanent recorded access to the subdivision, but only under conditions. The lawsuit would be dismissed with prejudice. They would pay my legal fees. They would fund retroactive and future road maintenance. They would record a formal acknowledgement that my remaining acreage was not subject to their covenants, and they would file a corrective statement with the county clarifying ownership of the corridor. The board president gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Then the mediator began reading the deed language aloud. Meets, bounds, recording numbers, expiration dates. The room grew quiet. Their attorney asked to see the certified copies again. His tone had changed, less declarative, more careful. We discussed risk projections. If a judge confirmed there was no legal access, even temporarily pending appeal, home sales could stall. Lenders might hesitate. Emergency motions could complicate everything. They requested a private caucus. The door closed. 2 hours passed. When they returned, the confidence had been replaced with calculation. They were ready to talk terms. The final agreement was signed 3 weeks later. It was thorough, precise. Recorded the same afternoon it was executed. The HOA dismissed their lawsuit with prejudice and paid my legal costs in full. They signed a perpetual access agreement that explicitly acknowledged my sole ownership of the roadway parcel. In exchange for continued use, they agreed to annual maintenance fees adjusted for traffic volume and inflation. A formal statement was distributed to residents clarifying that my 2,500 acres were not subject to subdivision covenants, architectural rules, or governance oversight. The correction was filed with the county, so it would follow every future title search. The court entered dismissal without fanfare. I didn't attend the HOA's next meeting, but I heard attendance was high. Questions were asked. Within a few months, the board president stepped down, citing professional commitments. The road remained open. Cattle trailers still rolled through at sunrise. Delivery trucks passed beneath the stone archway. The difference was invisible to most drivers, but legally everything had changed. I hadn't restricted access. I had simply made sure ownership was recorded correctly. After the paperwork settled, life resumed its usual rhythm. Cattle rotated pastures with the seasons. Feed deliveries arrived before dawn. The creek flooded in spring and receded by July like it always had. The subdivision continued to grow. Fresh sod, backyard barbecues, evening joggers, looping past the stone entrance. The road stayed open, not because I had to keep it that way, because I chose to. A month after the settlement recorded, I installed a small sign near the entrance. No oversized lettering, no warnings, just clean black text on a white background. Private road, access by recorded easement. Nothing aggressive, nothing emotional, just accurate. Each year now I update a maintenance log, traffic counts, resurfacing costs, drainage inspections. Copies go into the same fireproof cabinet that holds deeds older than most of the houses beyond the gate. Power, I've learned, isn't something you display. It's something you document, and as long as the records stay current, the authority stays quiet and unquestioned. Here's what most people misunderstand about HOAs. They aren't powerful because they're always right. They're powerful because most homeowners assume they are. Paperwork feels intimidating. Official letterhead, legal phrases, deadlines in bold print, and when people feel pressured, they react emotionally. They argue, they vent, they comply, but documentation beats volume, patience beats outrage, ownership beats assumption. I never raised my voice. I never blocked the gate. I never threatened anyone's home value. I just read the deed. Then I read it again. And when the time came, I let the paper speak for me. The truth is, this was never about humiliating a board or winning a standoff. It was about clarity, boundaries, record keeping done correctly. They sued me over 2,500 acres. Turns out all I needed was 30 feet of road. If you own property, know exactly what's on your deed. Most people don't, and that's when mistakes get expensive.